This is the final lesson, so I thought I would mark the occasion by dressing up as a little bit more festive. It's probably going to be about 24 degrees by the time that you're watching this lesson, so just be grateful that it is virtual and not in the classroom. Today we're going to be looking at themes then. You probably only need your Christmas Carol text in front of you and a pen highlighters as usual. It might be worthwhile having a piece of paper as well in case you want to make additional notes, unless you've still got room on the back of your fact sheet or the back of the text itself. So make sure you've got those things and then we can start. Right, so they are the 5 main things that we would be talking about. Again, the themes are only something that we sort of discuss as a school, like as English teachers. As long as you mention the word theme in your essays, and this is true for all of the literature that we study, as long as you mention the word theme, you can more or less come up with your own ideas, really. So these are the 5 that I'm going to be talking to today, but if you're in the exam and your mind just goes to pot and you think, oh my gosh, I can't even remember what one of the themes was. If you said it was the theme of social class or something, then you wouldn't get marked down for that whatsoever, so don't worry. The first one then is fact 1, and this is a theme of childhood and family, and what Dickens does here is he's linking the idea of happiness with being part of a family. So 2 options. You can pause it now, go back through your text and highlight all the examples of how this theme is presented. This is when, for those of you that like to be a little bit more organised and a little bit more visual, you could get your 5 coloured highlighters out and then allocate each theme to a particular colour. It might look quite pretty if you're into all of that. So go back through and find examples. Otherwise, you can just hang on a second and I will go through some of my own ideas. Thought you would. So what Dickens does is suggest that happiness is created by being part of a family, and as I've mentioned before, large Victorian families were common. We've seen that with the Cratchit family. At the start, Scrooge is alone, so he isolates himself from his family. The only person, remember that Dickens uses that word soul and he repeats that a lot, so Marley's dead, and Scrooge as well refuses to accept Fred's invitation when Fred invites him for Christmas dinner. When the ghost of Christmas past appears and shows him Scrooge's visions of his past life, it reminds Scrooge of the family that he had, so his close relationship and bond with his sister Fan, and also what he could have had. Remember that scene where the ghost shows Belle happily married, surrounded by a large family, and that makes Scrooge sort of reconsider the decisions that he made in the past. The Ghost of Christmas Present shows Scrooge how families comfort each other, if you go and find that. More specifically with the Cratchit family, but also with the miners and the sailors and the lighthouse keepers. And then we've got the Ghost of Christmas Yet to Come, and he shows Scrooge what his life will become if he continues to isolate himself. Remember, you've got the thieves selling his belongings, you've got his neglected grave, the body being laid out and no one caring for it, and the rats gnawing away at it. So a few examples there. And then finally in Stave 5, the happier side of the theme, I suppose, is when Scrooge becomes part of the 2 families. He's accepted by Fred and he becomes that second father to Tiny Tim. So make sure you've got at least those ones. Like I say, it's a huge theme. There's so many more examples. So if I was you, I would definitely go back through and highlight any examples that you find as well. Right, the next theme then, fact 2, is Christmas. More specifically Christmas spirit, and this idea that Christmas spirit is everywhere, and it's so powerful that it can transform Scrooge. Again, pause it now, find your own examples of how the theme is presented, or, as I'm sure you probably will do now, just wait for me to go through them. Right, so Christmas spirit is everywhere, as I've already said. It's first introduced by Fred and Bob in Stave 1. Christmas spirit and compassion is something that these 2 characters show all the way throughout the novel. Fred talks about Christmas not having put a scrap of gold or silver in his pocket, but it has done him good and will do him good, and he says God bless it. Bob Cratchit has got that childhood innocence and playful nature toward Christmas. When he runs out of Scrooge's office on Christmas Eve, he goes down the ice slide 20 times and then run home as fast as he could to play blind man's buff. So it's showing the effect of Christmas spirit and how it can transform everybody. Christmas also brings brings out the best in people. Scrooge's father changes his mind and agrees to have Scrooge home for Christmas, as explained through Fan. Fezziwig has his big Christmas party. Fred, as I've mentioned before, and also that scene from Stave 3 as well, when Fred shows his loyalty towards Scrooge when he says, "I am sorry for him." The portly gentlemen endeavour each year to go and raise some money for charity to help those people who are destitute and in need. And then you've got the Cratchits as well. They're humble, but they are grateful, and they're pleased to be spending Christmas Day together, and maybe like just having a rest from all their from all the hard working that they usually have to do in their working lives. So Dickens makes links between Christmas and the religion, and so what he references a lot is the religious ideas of Christmas. And I mentioned this when we were talking about the structure of the novel. So the religious aspects of it is being nice to everybody, helping others and going to church, and he does reference that. But then he also goes and talks about the secular celebrations, so the non-religious stuff really. Fezziwig's party and all the games at Fred's house and the Cratchits' dinner, the things that were turned into our more modern Christmas. And if you remember again, I said that Dickens is the founder of our modern Christmas, and that supposed quote that the girl said when Charles Dickens died is Father Christmas died too. So he does make links between Christmas and the religion there. And at the start of the 19th century, a little bit of contextual knowledge, Christmas was hardly celebrated. Remember that this book was written towards the end of the century, in 1843, but it had become the most important celebration by the end of this year. And in fact, a Christmas carol is sort of, it is a tradition. The Victorians started using it as a starting point to celebrating Christmas, really. They attended Charles Dickens' public readings, they read it themselves, and I think it was quite influential in the way that we celebrate Christmas now. In fact, as I put on the PowerPoint, look, the first Christmas card was sent the same year as the book was published, so it was showing our the movement towards the way that we celebrate Christmas now. So our third theme and our third fact is responsibility, and this is the idea of becoming more aware of others, and particularly the poor, linking in particularly with that social reform that I keep going on about. So pause it again, find your own examples of how this theme is presented in the novel, and then I will go through some ideas too. So, another reminder of this one that I've been repeating throughout the unit here. So he wrote the book to encourage people to become more aware of others, particularly the poor. Remember that he read the government report. Dickens was going to write a pamphlet back to the government to start off with, and then he thought, no, that's not powerful enough, I need to make it more of a message, and that's why he wrote the novella Christmas Carol. But Dickens, as a man as well, also had these strong views on Christianity, and he believed that people needed to seek out the opportunities to help others, rather than just going to church as an example of your religious beliefs. Now, in the last lesson, I mentioned something called Sabbatarianism. I've not got time to go through that, but if you do want to Google it, I'll put a link on the Teams chat, and some resources on there, just so you can find out a little bit more about it. But basically, what Dickens was saying is that you can't just say, "Oh, I go to church, therefore I'm religious and I'm going to help people." You actually need to show that through your actions, rather than just your religious beliefs. And what he does here is he shows how the wealthy can help the poor by taking that responsibility, by becoming more generous, and this is the opposite opinion to Malthus, which is what I went through in the first lesson. You've also got those links between poverty and death, as seen in Tiny Tim, when Scrooge starts feeling responsible for the people. Ultimately, you could argue that the pay rise that he gives Bob Cratchit means that Tiny Tim won't die. So we've got those links between poverty and death too. Our fourth theme, fact 4, is redemption, and this is changing your ways and becoming a better person. So pause it, find your own examples of how the theme is presented in the book, use a different colour to highlight it, and then we can go through it together. So the first one then, Dickens uses Scrooge's character as a vehicle to show that anyone in society is capable of changing. This is something that I've gone through and repeated throughout the study. The narrator, the omniscient narrator, shows at the beginning that Scrooge is an unsympathetic character for the reader to meet, but by the end of it he's become generous, he's become warm-hearted, and because he can redeem himself, it means that anybody in society can. There's hints throughout to suggest that Scrooge will change. If you remember the introduction of him, it says external warmth and cold had little influence on Scrooge, but then through the use of symbolism we are seeing those sort of hints and that foreshadowing that he will change. So see if you can find some examples of that when you're looking at this theme. And interestingly, he is not forced to change. At no point did the ghost say you need to do this. It is through his own choice and free will. So Dickens again is giving that subliminal message to the reader that it's your own choice. You just need to do it through understanding how you can help other people rather than being forced to help other people. So money then is our final fact. Money, as I put in your fact sheet then, is anything that could be linked with your social class, poverty or greed. And money does not always equate to happiness. You can be financially poor but still happy. So for the last time, find your own examples of how this theme is presented and then we can go through it together. Right, so the first one then is, don't forget that this was set in the Industrial Revolution. So this is when the businessmen and the factory owners became more rich, but the factory workers and those that were helping them earn the money often lived in poverty. So we see that mostly through the Cratchit family. And Dickens does seem to attack those characters who value money above people. First of all, you've got Scrooge at the start. Are there no prisons? Are there no workhouses? He also uses that shocking and less romantic tone when he's describing Old Jay and the thieves and their disrespectful behaviour. And also that dismissive attitude of the men when they're discussing Scrooge's death in Stay 4. I think one of them returns the conversation back to the weather, showing that there's no respect there whatsoever. And I think the most important point that Dickens is trying to make is this idea that you can be financially poor but still happy. Money does not equate to happiness. So, putting it all together then, that is it. When we return back to school then, we will be going through this in a little bit more detail when it comes to the revision. But the chances are that will only be about a 2-week unit. What you need to do now then is know these quotes that I've gone through, or if you can't do that, just the examples and references from throughout the plot, the beginning, the middle and the end. As long as you can do that, you'll be able to write an essay. You also need to understand how and why a character changes, so think about those specific events that a character experiences or sees to make them change. Another thing that you need to do is consider the effect of what each ghost shows Scrooge and how this affects him. Be aware of the context too. Just like it is for your poetry anthology, if you can link in the context to as many explanations as you can, that will show a real heightened understanding of everything. And then to go one step further, consider an audience response and how it might change over the years, specifically looking at a Victorian audience, comparing it to a modern one. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put links to BBC Bite-Size. There's some really nice stuff on there. I'll also try and find some other film versions to watch too. And then what I'll put on the files tab is some additional reading. I've got some university essays about A Christmas Carol and how people respond to that. And then there's also some lectures from teachers, like teacher training, that I think might be quite useful too. I'll put a message on the Teams chat when they are uploaded those, just so you're aware of it. I think that is everything. For the final time, if there are any questions or anything from out these 10 lessons that you want me to go through in slower and more detail, then I'm more than happy to do so. Otherwise, I will see you very, very soon. Have a great summer holidays. Bye.